Hi everyone, I'm Holly Lolly. Why are the Japanese tired of tourists and do not want to see foreigners in their country? Today, we will analyze what exactly annoys the Japanese about tourists and why they dream of peace and quiet. Also, we will go together with you to one of the most popular and crowded tourist places in Tokyo, the Harry Potter Museum, which is fully imbued with a New Year's magical atmosphere. Many people may have the impression that the Japanese don't like tourists just because they are foreigners. In most cases, this is not the case. The locals are very patient and friendly, but sometimes you can hear more and more often the opinion that tourists have become tiresome for the Japanese. Recently, the news discussed a case where a group of foreigners made a huge bonfire near their house in a residential area. And, of course, they arranged dancing and all this noisy fun in the middle of the night, which caused shock among the locals. There were also cases when foreigners even fought with patrolmen because the police asked them to behave properly and not disturb the people around them. There are often cases when foreigners, coming to Japan, start shooting some funny prank videos in subway cars, directly bothering passersby. Japanese people are very shy, and, of course, all this causes them terrible discomfort. I would like to say that when you come to a foreign country, you should familiarize yourself with the rules and norms of the culture you are visiting. It is one thing when tourists come and just admire the beauty of the country, learning something new, and quite another when they directly cause discomfort to the locals. When the Japanese see a foreigner, they are sometimes simply afraid that this person might behave inappropriately. The Japanese know that another Japanese person will not cause them any trouble or embarrassment, but with a foreigner, they feel like anything could happen. Because of this, the Japanese often avoid foreigners and look at them with a certain suspicion. By the way, I recently had a period when I didn't live in Japan, and now that I'm back again, I've already noticed a certain difference. When you live here day in and day out, you don't notice this. But I remember when I first came to Japan, everyone who knew even a little English was ready to explain something to you. The locals wanted to help, were very friendly, and smiled a lot. But now I see that the Japanese try to avoid me somehow and look at me with a certain suspicion, and I couldn't help but notice it. The other day, we went to Yokohama to the cable car. We rode it, saw the local beauty and scenery. After buying tickets, you have to wait in line to get into a cabin. To reach this cabin, you must take an elevator. In front of us, 3 locals were let in, and 5 of us were allowed to enter with them. Seeing that we were foreigners, the staff member who let us into the elevator explained several times that they entered first and we entered second. He emphasized that we had to exit the elevator in the same order they would exit first because they had entered first. He asked if we understood him, and we answered affirmatively. Then he asked us how we should exit the elevator. We repeated that they would exit first, and we would exit second. He then said that we had memorized everything correctly and asked if we would follow these instructions. You understand, they explained everything to us like to kindergartners, literally on their fingers, so that we wouldn't disrupt the order. The Japanese like clarity. I respect and appreciate them for this because, you know, when you go abroad, such things are not always clear. Take the elevator as an example. When you're standing there waiting, and other people arrive and simply jump in front of you just as the elevator arrives, and you stand there in shock because you were standing there first. When you live in Japan, you also line up, you follow the rules, and you expect to see the same from other people in other countries. And when that doesn't happen, there's a slight misunderstanding. So, in this case, of course, I understand perfectly well, but it's just that before, none of the locals had ever been told how to get out of the elevator, and we went through it, hell, 3 times. And I realized for myself that this is really the point the Japanese have reached when foreigners have, to put it mildly, fed up with them. You know, there was also a case when foreigners were smoking hookahs right in the middle of the street. They probably thought that such self-expression was a manifestation of something cool, but, you know, I don't see anything cool in it because when you come to a foreign country and start disturbing their peace and order, it's wild. In Japan, smoking in public places is forbidden, and such brazen behavior, when you disregard the norms and rules of this country, is considered rude, to put it mildly. And, of course, the Japanese increasingly realize that the more foreigners come who do not accept their norms of behavior but simply try to make some adjustments, the life of the Japanese becomes less comfortable, and it knocks them out of their usual rhythm. After such incidents, the people of the country become more and more worried and afraid that such behavior might disrupt their culture. That's why, for example, posters have started to appear around Tokyo, and I also know that it's happening all over Japan, that urge foreigners to behave appropriately. Sometimes, they can be written in a slightly harsh tone, but how else can you reach out and show that certain behavior is unacceptable? If you come to another country, you should think about the rules, customs, and norms of that country rather than standing out as a black sheep in a negative context. Some Japanese restaurants have started introducing tariffs for tourists, which are much more expensive than for locals. This can be seen as an attempt to curb the influx of tourists. For example, in certain establishments, because of this issue, locals often have nowhere to eat. They already queue up for food, and when there are too many tourists, the locals, who live here, have to spend more time waiting. And if the tariff is higher for foreigners, then tourists are less likely to congregate in one place. This does not apply to all restaurants, only to those where the influx of tourists is extremely high. In Himeji, where the famous castle is located, the authorities decided to raise ticket prices for foreign tourists several times over. Thus, they are trying to keep the historical site in good condition by limiting the number of tourists who visit without understanding or respecting the local rules. You know, I told you once before that, for example, in Asakusa, a very popular tourist spot, there used to be signs stating that the entrance was only for Japanese, only for locals, so foreigners were asked not to visit those establishments. This was due to the fact that foreigners resented the practice in local establishments where it is customary to serve small snacks on plates, which cost 500 yen. If you sit down at a table, even without ordering anything, these snacks are added to your bill regardless of whether you want them or not. Locals are perfectly fine with this. They have no complaints. However, tourists resented having to pay for something they didn't order. And since the Japanese are not confrontational, to prevent disputes and squabbles, they put up signs stating that the place was for Japanese customers only. Now, we can say that their approach has become a little more creative. They write in English that there are no available seats, but then they write something else in Japanese. And if you translate it from Japanese, you'll realize that you can actually get in. So, if a foreigner lives here, accepts the traditions and culture, understands Japanese, and respects local norms, they will still be welcomed. And those tourists who just came here will read no seats and bypass this establishment. What do you think about this? Please write your thoughts in the comments. Are the Japanese doing the right thing? Do you think we should somehow restrict tourists specifically in Japan? By the way, Google recently reminded me that it's been 10 years since I first came to Japan. It was really nice to see photos from 10 years ago. At that time, when you came to Japan, you felt like you were one foreigner among the Japanese because there were very few tourists, and everyone really looked at you as if you were some kind of alien. Now there are a lot of tourists here, and of course, Japanese norms are changing. Do you think Japan should become more open and, I'm not afraid to say this word, more similar to other countries? Or should it still remain a closed country, with tourists being allowed in very selectively? Write your thoughts in the comments. And now I want to show you one of the most magical places in Tokyo, the Harry Potter Museum. Let's go there together and see how foreigners behave in such crowded places. You know, I've tried to get into this museum several times already. When it first opened, it was very difficult to buy tickets. By the way, don't make the same mistake as many tourists. Many think, I'll just come and buy tickets on the spot. No, unfortunately, everything will be sold out. If I had tried to buy tickets, let's say, a year and a half ago, it would have been necessary to book several months in advance, almost 6 months, just to get in. Now I had to wait probably a week to get into this place. So today we are going with tickets to this museum. I'll show you, tell you what's inside, and share what's interesting there. Let's go! The Harry Potter Museum in Tokyo opened on June 16, 2023. It became the second such park after the famous Warner Brothers Studios in London. This magical building is located just 15 minutes from the city center in the Narama district. Its area is as much as 30,000 square meters, so don't hesitate, it will be unrealistically interesting. You should realize that this is a museum exhibition, not an amusement park. There are no roller coasters here, but you will see the scenery used in movies, costumes of heroes, cream beer, and other things. It is better to get tickets to the museum in advance. Even before the official opening in mid-June, all tickets were sold out until the end of August. Now, of course, the situation is much easier. You can grab a ticket in a week, or even a few days. We managed to get tickets 3 days before the visit, but not always so can lead, so I recommend you to think over your journey to the world of magic in advance. You can't count on getting into the museum day in and day out. The School of Witchcraft is not the only location in this theme park. There's also the Ministry of Magic and the Forbidden Forest, Platform 9 3/4, Ollivander's Shop, Hagrid's House, and many more. Friends, keep your cool, pour a cream beer, or any other beverage, and let's go. The price for an adult ticket is about $43, and children's tickets are about $26. When we booked our tickets to the museum, it turned out that the last available time was for 2 p.m. This really surprised me, as my family and I usually prefer to get out somewhere closer to the evening. At first I didn't even understand why it was so organized, but after visiting the museum, everything became obvious. because the tour lasts on average more than 4 hours. During this time you will most likely have time to go through all the halls, but there are quite a few of them here. Therefore, if you want to enjoy and definitely go around everything, it is better to go to the museum in the morning and spend the whole day here. At the entrance, visitors are divided into groups so that there are not huge crowds inside. You are accompanied by a guide, but the story is in Japanese. Only at the exit we noticed a stand with audio guides, where you can take a device with translation into your native language. We missed this moment, but even without translation everything turned out to be incredibly interesting. So, if you plan a visit, keep this in mind. To be honest, the first hall made me a little sad. I thought my expectations would not be met. There were posters from the filming of all parts of the saga. Without an audio guide, of course, nothing is clear, just pictures and photos. I was worried that in the future the whole museum will consist of such rooms, where posters will hang and each tells how the movies were created. We spent literally a few minutes in this room and were asked to move on to the second room. The next room was a dark room and there the guide was again giving some details about the movie in Japanese. He mentioned who were the understudies of the main characters and a few other facts. We just stood there and listened, not really understanding anything. The next room turned out to be a movie theater, where we were all seated and a movie about how parts of the franchise were filmed was shown. Listening to all this in Japanese was, of course, difficult, and we understood almost nothing. The kids got bored quickly, and I started to worry that it would go the same way. Even so, at this point I began to notice how responsible the other visitors were for the event. Many came dressed as Hogwarts students or even dressed up as popular characters. After the movie was over, the tour guides asked if there were any birthday boys among the visitors. And yes, there was a guy who was trusted to open the huge doors to the next room with the wave of a magic wand, and there, I finally saw something interesting and even magical. We got to the dining hall, where there were long tables, which were divided by faculties. Everything was decorated in the New Year's style, and I immediately remembered the scene from the movie, when everything looked just as magical at the Christmas banquet at Hogwarts. There was a huge Christmas tree at the end of the hall, and in front of it, the professor's table. Nearby were the figures of Dumbledore, Professor Snape, and McGonagall. It was the moment when I started to forget about the thought of wanting to go through all the halls as quickly as possible. Each room had a different amount of time, but we couldn't stay longer. If I didn't want to stay longer in the first rooms, I wanted to stay longer here. But we were being pushed because it was time for the next group to enter. The next room with moving staircases and live talking paintings was pure magic. I recall that at Hogwarts, to get into certain rooms, you had to know the password so that the character in the painting would let you into their room. Here you could feel like a real Hogwarts student, as if you were standing in front of one of these living paintings and waiting for it to open the entrance. In a separate room there was a photo zone, where you could become a part of the painting, or rather, create your own live image. You have to scan a QR code, but after that you have to run like a madman to the green because there are only 20 seconds to shoot yourself for the picture. And then your image appears in the hall. But there were difficulties. In the room with photo zones was weak internet, and we could not scan the code at once. Everyone was running around, asking for the password for Wi-Fi, fussing not to miss the moment. It was inconvenient, because the photo zone was included in the ticket price, and such a technical moment seemed unnecessary. In the end we were able to take a photo, but we were among the last to leave the hall, as we spent a lot of time trying to solve the problem. We visited the students' dorms and saw what the rooms they lived in looked like. I noticed how much different the behavior of Japanese and foreigners was. This is what I told you about at the beginning of the video. Of course, there were no fights and there were no negative moments, but still, many foreigners behaved noisily, pushed, sometimes even tried to get in front of the queue. Each room in the museum is organized so that all visitors had equal time for inspection and participation in interactive activities. But unfortunately, because of some guests who ignored the rules and delayed, the whole process started to get disrupted. Personally, we sometimes didn't have time to do something because someone tried to get ahead of us or spent too long in one place. The Japanese, on the other hand, followed the instructions clearly and were attentive to the instructions of the staff. It makes you think about how important it is to respect other people's traditions and rules, especially in such a unique place as this museum, and about why the recent Japanese are tired of tourists headlines in the news keep popping up. But let's not talk about sad things, we have a lot of interesting things ahead of us. Next up was a game of Quidditch. 10 points to Gryffindor. In this room we could feel like real players, like in that famous scene where Harry Potter caught the snitch for the first time. Here again there were QR codes. We had to wait in line. We were divided into two teams, the Slytherin and Gryffindor fans. We, of course, supported the latter. We were told what emotions to show: joy or sadness, thumbs up or down, clapping hands. We worried along with the Gryffindor boys as if we were playing this legendary game ourselves. And lo and behold, Harry caught the snap, and victory was ours. This room was just everything to get a feel for the atmosphere of the game. A mock-up of a real field, just like in the movie. You could see the real brooms that the players used to fly. For example, a 2000 Nimbus. Also here you will meet Victor Kram and other characters from the Cup of Fire. By the way, write in the comments your favorite part from the Harry Potter saga. Now you and I can sneak into Dumbledore's room while he sleeps. Here was the memory maelstrom, the very object with which the professor could immerse himself in other people's memories and experiences. It was a large vial of smoke that was dispelled supposedly with a wand, and it reflected various scenes from the past, which looked very magical. In the book, the memory maelstrom was used to show Harry important moments. For example, memories of Tom Riddle and other events. Next we were in a room where costumes and paraphernalia that the actors wore or used during filming were on display. Each item was like a little story. The one that stood out in particular was Hermione's very iconic dress from the Christmas ball, and a whole stand with masks of Death Eaters. We were in for a marathon of learning magic. We became Hogwarts students and visited different classrooms. For example, in the huge library, which looked like a real library. After that it was potions class. We sat like mice, because there were two teachers in the class, Severus Snape and Horace Slughorn. Then it was time for the real spells. We were shown how to hold a wand and say the magic words. We learned the famous spell for disarming an opponent, Expelliarmus. And we even got into the room where Harry Potter found the mirror that shows a person what they want most in life. What spell would you like to be able to do? After class was over, everyone went to explore the Forbidden Forest. There we were surrounded by huge trees, semi-darkness, and the sounds of mysterious creatures. We immediately ran into Hagrid and his Beakwraith, who was clearly trying to warn us not to go any further into the forest. But, like true Hogwarts students, we decided to do things our own way and went deeper. Then we saw Ron's family's car hanging in the trees. And something about me told me that there should be that huge spider nearby as well. There were also Kentors in the woods. And then one of the most intense scenes from the movie was recreated in front of us, when the Dementors were flying over the lake. Either I was winding myself up or the air really did get cold at that point. But don't worry, of course a Patronus appeared in front of us and saved the situation. But that wasn't the end of it, as the meeting with Aragog did take place. This is a huge spider that Hagrid saved as a child, and now he lives in the Forbidden Forest. It looked like a real one, and it was creepy in the dark. After that we went outside and ended up at Hagrid's house. We walked around for a while, took some pictures, and then what we had been dreaming about since we had been to the Universe Studio in Osaka happened. Of course it's the incredible cream beer. Only in real life it's a non-alcoholic soda, but the most delicious I've ever tasted. Paying is contactless, you just have to put money in the machine. We paid $40 for 5 glasses, but the cool thing is that you can take them away as a souvenir. Well, I would even say that you don't want to, but you have to keep the souvenir because there are no trash cans in Japan. So you have to take the glasses with you. On the territory of the cafe there are taps under which glasses can be washed because they are very sticky, and put in your bag. In this zone there is also a restaurant where you can eat if you are hungry, and a few photo zones, but there were queues for each of them, so we decided that taking a video as a souvenir would be enough. Actually, at this point we decided that this was the end and decided to walk around. But what was my surprise when it turned out that there were still a lot of interesting rooms ahead. I couldn't get rid of the feeling of incompleteness, because there was obviously something missing. And so, finally, platform 9 3/4 appeared in front of us. As expected, everything had been thought out to the smallest detail. We couldn't pass up the opportunity and decided to get in line to get on the train itself. The only thing that was a little frustrating was the mannequins. They didn't look as realistic as we would have liked, but everything else was top-notch. The train recreated the most iconic moments. In Harry and Ron's compartment, where they were eating sweets, there was a chocolate frog jumping on the window. In some of the carriages, characters from different faculties were seated. In others, the same Harry, Ron, and Hermione, but from different parts of the movies. One of the highlights was the scene with the Dementors when the characters were traveling to Hogwarts for the new school year. Then we got into the room where it was clearly shown how interior details, statues, and other props for the movie were created. What is striking is that many of the elements were made by hand, and to create some of the effects, the latest technology, 3D printing and digital modeling techniques were used. In yet another room, you could see in detail how the characters and fantasy creatures were created. I was struck by how detailed and realistic the models looked, especially Hagrid's head. The facial expressions were as human-like as possible. After that, of course, we could not miss the Ministry of Magic. This is where all the key issues of magical society are decided. We saw a lot of familiar faces. Write in the comments who you recognized. There was a fireplace from which mages can move to different places using powder. With the help of the QR code, it was possible to make a video as if you suddenly appear from the fireplace, as in the movie. But we already had too little time, so we hurried on. In the next room, we were shown interviews of Japanese dubbing actors. The room was dark, everything was in Japanese, but with English subtitles. So if your English level allows, you could learn more about the actors' experiences. At some point we thought that we will probably stay in this museum. There are definitely enough seats for everyone. It's so huge and impressive, I didn't realize where the end would be, because then we ended up in Slant Alley. This is where wizards buy everything they need for their studies and more. What's one thing every wizard should have? A wand, of course. You can go to Ollivander's shop for it. There was a store in the alley with all sorts of harm's way. The Weasley brothers, a magical menagerie, everything for Quidditch, a magic bank, and other shops. The last hall was a snow fairy tale. I just froze and wanted to stay here for a long time. It was a winter Hogwarts covered in snow. I felt so nostalgic. It's like I'm a little girl. It's snowing outside my window. It's the eve of a new year. I hold in my hands a snow-covered house with lights in the windows and try to see who lives inside. Maybe it's a girl who dresses up in a beautiful dress on New Year's Eve, or a little boy unpacking his toys. All in all, this room gave me a sense of calm and comfort, and all the problems faded into the background at that moment. Toward the end, we couldn't help but run into the gift department. Here you can completely incarnate yourself in the clothes of your favorite faculty. Buy uniforms, cloaks, wands, books, even a broom or magical animal. The Harry Potter Museum is a place that on full seriousness made me feel a part of the story, and brought me back to my childhood for a while. Friends, thank you so much for watching. Write in the comments what part of the museum surprised or pleased you more. Subscribe and like. See you in new videos.